A catch-pole tightened around the throat of a decorated military working dog, while 40 festival-goers filmed it on their phones. The warden smiled. He thought he was putting down a dangerous animal. He had no idea he was about to declare war on an active-duty Navy SEAL, and that by sundown the following day, his badge, his warden's license, and his entire town's rotten foundation would be lying in the dirt beside him. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let us know which country you're watching from tonight. And if stories about loyalty, justice, and the bond between a soldier and his dog mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe, because this one is going to stay with you. The town of Millbrook Falls, Tennessee, sat in a green bowl between two ridgelines. The kind of place where the Founders Day Festival was still the biggest event of the year, and half the town showed up in matching commemorative t-shirts. Strings of yellow bulbs crisscrossed Main Street. Somewhere a bluegrass band tuned up on a flatbed trailer. The smell of funnel cake and barbecue smoke drifted over the crowd, thick enough to taste. It was the kind of small-town evening that looked, from a distance, like nothing bad could ever happen inside it. Ezra Callum had not planned on coming. He was a chief petty officer with the Naval Special Warfare Community, 12 years in, most of them spent in places he would never talk about at a dinner table. He was 34 years old, built lean and economical, the kind of muscle that came from function rather than vanity. He wore a faded flannel with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, plain jeans, boots that had seen actual dirt instead of just fashion distressing. His face carried a short beard and the particular stillness of a man who had spent a career learning to be the quietest thing in any room. He was 2 weeks into leave, visiting his aunt on the outskirts of town, and she had all but dragged him to the festival because she said he'd been hiding in her guest room like a ghost since he arrived. At his side, moving with the loose, watchful gait of an animal who had done this 1,000 times in far more dangerous places, was Koda. Koda was a 9-year-old German shepherd, sable and black, with a chest like a barrel and eyes the color of strong tea. He wore no vest tonight, nothing to announce what he was, but anyone who looked closely would notice the notch missing from his left ear and the faint white seam of an old scar running along his shoulder, souvenirs of a deployment neither Ezra nor Koda talked about. Koda had 2 documented finds that saved platoons from walking into buried device, one confirmed apprehension of an armed combatant who'd gone for a weapon, and a Silver Star equivalent commendation for military working dogs that Ezra kept folded in a drawer because looking at it made his chest hurt in a way he didn't have a name for. Koda was, on paper and in practice, a war hero. Tonight he was just a good dog on a leash, walking beside his best friend through a street fair, enjoying the smell of funnel cake like any other dog would. People often assume peace is the default state of the world, that towns like Millbrook Falls exist in some protected bubble where cruelty only happens somewhere else, on some other street, in some other city. Ezra had unlearned that assumption a long time ago. Peace was never a place. It was a fragile agreement that held only until somebody with enough arrogance decided the rules didn't apply to them. That agreement was about to break in the parking lot behind Ruthie's diner. Sophia Marchetti had worked at Ruthie's since she was 17, waiting tables through community college with the kind of quiet competence that made regulars ask for her section by name. She was 23 now. Dark-haired, sharp-eyed, the sort of person who could carry 6 plates up one arm and still remember which table wanted extra ranch. Tonight she was working the festival's outdoor stand, selling pulled pork sandwiches out of a folding table set up behind the diner, close enough to the music that she had to shout over it to take orders. She noticed Tyler Prescott the moment he stumbled into her line. He was 26, the only son of Councilman Grant Prescott, and he had inherited his father's jawline and none of his father's caution about being watched. He wore an untucked polo and the loose, glassy expression of a man 3 or 4 drinks past the point where he should have stopped. His 2 friends trailed behind him, laughing at something that had probably not been funny even the first time. "Sophia, baby," Tyler said, leaning both forearms on her folding table, hard enough to make the napkin dispenser rattle. "Been a minute. You still ignoring my texts?" "I'm working, Tyler," Sophia said, not looking up from the sandwich she was wrapping. "You're always working." He reached across the table and closed his hand around her wrist, not gently. "Come on, take a break, walk with me." She pulled back, hard, breaking his grip. "Let go of me." The words carried further than she meant them to. A few people nearby turned their heads, then looked away just as quickly, the particular reflex of small towns where everyone knows exactly whose son is causing the scene and exactly how little good it will do to intervene. Tyler's face changed. The lazy, drunken charm curdled into something meaner. "You embarrassing me in front of my friends?" His voice rose. "You know who my dad is?" "I don't care who your dad is," Sophia said, and something in her flat, unafraid tone seemed to detonate whatever restraint the alcohol had left in him. He came around the table fast. He grabbed her by the shoulder and shoved her backward into the metal frame of the tent. She cried out as her hip caught the edge of the table, sending a tray of sandwiches scattering across the asphalt. He raised his hand. He never got to bring it down. Ezra had been 15 feet away, walking Koda past the tent line toward the funnel cake stand, when the shove happened. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. Some men need a full second to process a threat before their body catches up to their instincts. Ezra had spent a career training that second out of himself entirely. He was already moving before his conscious mind had finished the sentence, "That man just hit a woman." He didn't even give Koda a verbal command. He simply dropped the leash. A trained dog off-leash in a crowd should have been the most dangerous thing in that parking lot. Instead, Koda became the most controlled thing in it. He crossed the 15 feet in under 2 seconds, a low, fast blur of black and sable, and he did not go for Tyler's throat or his face. He was a working dog trained for exactly this kind of domestic escalation. He clamped his jaws around Tyler's raised forearm, just above the wrist, hard enough to stop the strike completely dead in the air, not hard enough to do more than break skin and leave a set of deep, ugly bruises that would need a tetanus shot and a lot of explaining. Tyler screamed. He screamed the way men scream when their body is doing something their pride has never had to account for. He staggered backward, tripped over the collapsed table, and went down hard onto the asphalt, with Koda still latched onto his forearm, growling low and controlled, exactly as trained, holding and not tearing. "Out," Ezra said quietly, and Koda released instantly, backing off 2 full steps and sitting, his amber eyes locked on Tyler with total, disciplined focus, ready to re-engage the second a real threat resumed, and not 1 second before. The whole thing had taken under 4 seconds. Sophia stood pressed against the tent frame, one hand on her bruised hip, staring at the man crumpled on the ground in front of her, then at the dog sitting calmly beside a stranger in a flannel shirt, then at the growing ring of phones already lifted and recording. Tyler's 2 friends helped him up, cursing, one of them already dialing his phone with shaking hands. Tyler cradled his bleeding forearm against his chest, his face white with shock and red with fury in roughly equal measure. "That dog attacked me," he shouted, loud enough to carry over the band, which had gone quiet, along with most of the crowd. "It just attacked me for no reason. Somebody call the cops. Call animal control. That thing needs to be put down right now." Nobody in that crowd had missed the shove. Nobody had missed the raised hand, but nobody in that crowd, watching Tyler Prescott's face twist with entitled outrage, could yet imagine just how far he and his father were willing to bend the story to make it disappear. Ezra knelt beside Sophia first. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, though her hands were shaking. "He grabbed me. He was going to hit me. Your dog." She looked at Koda, who had not moved from his sit, still watching Tyler with total, quiet vigilance. "Your dog saved me." "I know," Ezra said. "I saw." He didn't know yet that seeing wouldn't matter. Not in this town, not against this family. Within 11 minutes, 2 things would arrive in that parking lot that would decide the shape of the next 72 hours of his life. A Millbrook Falls patrol car and a white truck marked Animal Control, driven by a man named Cole Bishop who had known Councilman Grant Prescott for 20 years and owed him considerably more than a favor. The sirens arrived faster than Ezra expected, which told him something about who had made the call before the story had even finished happening. A Millbrook Falls cruiser rolled up first, followed 30 seconds later by the White County Animal Control truck, its light bar throwing lazy amber pulses across the tents. The crowd parted the way crowds do, curiosity overriding caution, phones still raised. Warden Cole Bishop stepped out of the truck like a man who had already decided how this was going to end. He was in his 50s, thick through the middle, with a gray buzz cut and small eyes that moved over a scene the way an accountant moves over a ledger, looking only for the entries that mattered to him. He didn't look at Sophia. He didn't look at the overturned table or the scattered sandwiches. He walked straight toward Koda, unclipping a heavy aluminum catch pole from the side of his truck as he came. "That the dog?" Bishop asked, not really asking. "That dog stopped an assault," Ezra said evenly. "He's a retired status-certified working animal. He responded to a direct physical threat against that young woman and disengaged the instant the threat stopped. I have his registration and his handler documentation in my truck if you need it." Bishop didn't slow down. "Save it. I got a call about a vicious dog attack on a civilian at a public event. That's what I respond to." He didn't attack anyone. He intervened. That's a real nice word for it. Bishop's eyes finally flicked toward Tyler, who was being fussed over by paramedics near the ambulance, his forearm wrapped in gauze already gone pink. "You bit a man badly enough he needed medical attention. Under County Ordinance 14-2, any animal that inflicts injury on a person in a public setting gets seized pending a dangerous animal review. That's not a suggestion, that's the law." He was defending a woman from an assault. There's a difference between a dangerous animal and a trained one doing exactly what he was trained to do. You can make that argument at the hearing. Bishop extended the catch pole, the wire loop swinging loose at the end. "Right now, I need you to step back from the animal." Something in Ezra's chest went very cold and very still. The particular stillness he recognized from a career of watching situations tip past the point where words could still fix them. "You don't need the pole. He'll load into a crate without a fight if you ask me to do it. There's no reason to—" "Step back from the animal," Bishop repeated, louder now, playing to the ring of phones the way a man does when he's decided the crowd is his real audience. Koda felt the tension climbing before Ezra even said a word. His ears flattened slightly. A low sound started somewhere in his chest, not aggression, just the ancient animal recognition that his handler was under threat, and his handler had not yet given him permission to relax. "Easy," Ezra murmured, one hand resting flat on Koda's head, and the growl died instantly, swallowed by 9 years of discipline that ran deeper than fear. Bishop didn't wait. He swung the loop of the catch pole toward Koda's neck with the practiced, careless speed of a man who handled strays and raccoons for a living and had never once had to think about the difference between an animal and a soldier. The wire tightened. Koda flinched, a sharp, undignified jerk of surprise and pain, the kind of handling no military working dog should ever have to experience from a stranger with no training in canine behavior at all. "Hey," Ezra said sharply, stepping forward on pure reflex, and that was the mistake that gave the second officer, a young patrolman named Deputy Ferris, the excuse he needed. "Sir, step back," Ferris barked, already reaching for Ezra's arm. "I'm not resisting, I'm asking him to handle my dog properly. There's a right way to— Hands behind your back." It happened fast after that, the way these things always do once the machinery of a bad decision starts turning. Ferris spun Ezra around and pressed him against the side of the animal control truck. Ezra didn't fight it. He had made exactly this calculation in exactly this kind of moment before, on foreign soil, with far higher stakes. A physical struggle here would only make things worse for Koda, and Koda was the only thing in this parking lot that actually needed protecting. He let his body go slack. He let the cuffs click shut around wrists that had carried far heavier weight than this. "You're detaining me for asking a question," Ezra said quietly. "Not a protest, just a fact laid on the record, for whoever might need it later. You're being detained for interfering with an animal control officer performing his duty," Ferris said, though the words came out with the flat, rehearsed uncertainty of a young cop repeating a line someone more senior had fed him. Behind them, Bishop hauled Koda toward a steel crate in the back of the truck, the wire loop still cinched tight enough to make the dog's breathing labor. Koda did not fight the pole. He did not snap or lunge. Every instinct in his body screamed to defend his handler from the men restraining him, and every hour of training he had ever received told him to hold, to comply, to trust that Ezra would fix this the way he always fixed everything. He climbed into the crate because Ezra, twisting his head against the side of the truck, managed to catch his eye and say one word, low and steady: "Load." The door slammed, the latch clicked. Through the small grated window, Koda's amber eyes found Ezra one last time, wide with confusion and betrayal, unable to understand why the man who had always kept him safe was now standing handcuffed and helpless while strangers drove away with him. Sophia pushed through the small knot of onlookers, her hips still throbbing where she'd hit the tent frame. "Wait, that's not. He didn't do anything wrong. The dog saved me. Tyler grabbed me first. You can't just—" "Ma'am, step back," Ferris said, not unkindly, but with the particular deafness of a man who had already been told, quietly and off the record, which version of tonight's events he was supposed to hear. Nobody in that parking lot yet understood the machinery already turning behind the scenes. They didn't know that Councilman Grant Prescott had received a phone call from his son within 90 seconds of the bite, or that his second call, 2 minutes later, had gone directly to Cole Bishop's cell phone, or that his third call, 4 minutes after that, had gone to Sheriff Dale Huxley, a man whose re-election campaign 3 years running had been quietly bankrolled by Prescott family money. They didn't know that somewhere in a lakefront office, with a view of the very diner Sophia worked at, Grant Prescott was already sketching the outline of a story that would turn his son's assault into a stranger's unprovoked attack. A story big enough and loud enough to bury whatever 40 phones had just recorded. They only knew what they'd seen. A woman shoved to the ground, a dog that stopped it, and now a truck driving away with that dog in a cage while the man who loved him stood in handcuffs, watching it go. The county animal shelter sat on the edge of town behind a chain-link fence and a row of dying oak trees, a low cinder block building that smelled permanently of bleach and wet concrete. Koda was placed in a quarantine kennel in the back, a space built for strays and biters, 6 feet by 8 feet of painted concrete with a steel drain in the floor and no soft place to lie down. He paced the width of it for the first hour, nose pressed to the chain-link door, whining low in his throat, a sound Ezra would have recognized instantly as pure animal grief if he had been there to hear it. He was not. Ezra spent that first night in a cell at the county jail, staring at a concrete ceiling, running the timeline of the evening over and over, looking for the exact moment things had gone wrong, and finding, every time, that the moment was not his. It was Tyler Prescott's raised hand. Everything after that had simply been the world rearranging itself around a lie. A young shelter tech named Marisol Ortiz was the only person who treated Koda like what he was, rather than what the paperwork said he was. She was 26, soft-spoken, with a habit of talking quietly to every animal in her care whether or not they could understand the words. When she read the intake sheet, dangerous animal, bit adult male, pending disposition hearing, she frowned, because the dog in front of her did not match the sheet. He sat calmly the moment she crouched near his kennel. He let her examine the raw, shaped line where the catch pole had bitten into his neck, without so much as a flinch of aggression. When she checked his tattooed ear, the faded military service number stopped her cold. She looked it up on her own phone that night, off the clock, and found a small, half-forgotten local news article from 4 years earlier about a Millbrook Falls native serving overseas, whose military working dog had been credited with saving an entire unit from an ambush. The dog's name in the article was Koda. She didn't say anything to Bishop. She had learned a long time ago that saying the wrong thing to Cole Bishop got you nowhere and sometimes got you fired. But she started, quietly, keeping her own set of notes. By morning, the story on every local radio station and the front page of the Millbrook Falls Gazette's website carried the headline, "Councilman's Son Attacked by Aggressive Dog at Founders Day Festival," alongside a photograph of Tyler Prescott's bandaged forearm and a quote from Grant Prescott himself. "This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior that puts our children and families at risk. I've asked the Sheriff's Department and Animal Control to pursue the maximum consequences allowed under our county's dangerous animal ordinance." There was no mention of Sophia. There was no mention of the shove, the raised hand, or the tent frame she'd been slammed into. There was no mention that the aggressive behavior in question had lasted 4 seconds and ended the moment the threat ended. The story had already been written before the sun came up, and it had been written by the only family in town with the money and the connections to make sure it stuck. Grant Prescott sat behind the desk of his lakefront real estate office that morning, a tall, silver-templed man in his late 50s whose handshake had built half the zoning approvals in the county over the last 2 decades. He was not, on the surface, a cruel man. He believed, in some genuinely unexamined corner of his own mind, that protecting his family's name was simply what a good father did. He had also, less examined still, spent the last 18 months quietly assembling parcels of lakefront property along the very strip of Main Street that included Ruthie's Diner, working with a development group out of Nashville that wanted to turn Millbrook Falls' modest, unglamorous waterfront into a resort corridor. Sophia's testimony, if it ever reached a courtroom, would not just embarrass his son. It would draw exactly the kind of unwanted scrutiny onto the diner's ownership dispute. The zoning variance he'd pushed through last spring, and the small mountain of paperwork he had been hoping nobody would ever read closely enough to question. A dead dog and a quietly dropped assault charge solved two problems at once. He picked up his phone and dialed Sheriff Huxley's private line. "Dale," he said once the sheriff picked up, "we need to make sure this doesn't become a circus. I want the dog processed under the dangerous animal statute, full euthanasia track, no exceptions. And I want that soldier boy to understand exactly how much trouble he's actually in if he decides to make noise about this. Grant, I got 40 phone videos out there that don't exactly match your version," Huxley said, though there was no real objection in his voice, only the tired caution of a man protecting his own comfortable arrangement. "This could get messy." "Then let's make sure it doesn't get that far," Prescott said. "Have Bishop expedite the hearing. 48 hours. Get it over with while the news cycle's still on our side." Huxley didn't argue further. He never did. Ezra was released from the county jail late that afternoon. The charges against him quietly downgraded to a citation for obstruction, a formality with no teeth, but by then the damage had already been engineered where it actually mattered. He walked out into the parking lot blinking against the daylight, his aunt waiting for him with her car running, and the first thing he asked was not about himself. "Where's my dog?" The clerk at the front desk, a tired woman who clearly wanted no part of any of this, slid a printed notice across the counter without meeting his eyes. Ezra read it twice to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding it. Disposition hearing. Dangerous Animal Statute 14-2. Subject animal scheduled for euthanasia pending review. 72 hours from intake. Ezra had faced down armed men in the dark on 4 continents without his pulse rising above resting rate. Reading that notice, standing in a fluorescent-lit county office lobby that smelled like burnt coffee, was the first time in years he felt his hands actually shake. He did not shout. He did not slam his fist on the counter. He folded the notice once, carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket, and something in his eyes shifted into the particular, terrible calm of a man who has just decided exactly how far he is willing to go. 72 hours, he said quietly, mostly to himself. "Sir?" the clerk said. "That's plenty of time," Ezra said, and walked out the door. He called his aunt's landline that night because his own phone had been confiscated as evidence in a case that would never see a courtroom, and he made 3 calls that mattered. The first was to Master Chief Elena Frost, his old detachment commander, now serving as a liaison at the Regional Naval Special Warfare Command. The second was to a Judge Advocate General's office contact who owed him a favor from an incident report he'd quietly smoothed over years earlier. The third, the one that would matter most in the end, was to a young reporter named Priya Anand at the Millbrook Falls Gazette, a woman 2 years into her first real newspaper job who had spent that entire morning arguing with her editor about running Grant Prescott's press release without a single follow-up question. "I read your story this morning," Ezra told her, his voice level. "It's wrong. Every sentence of it is wrong. And I think if you actually looked at the footage instead of the press release, you'd know that." Priya was quiet for a moment. "Who is this?" "My name is Ezra Callum. That's my dog they're planning to kill in 72 hours, and I think you're the only person in this town whose job is supposed to be finding out what actually happened." There was a long pause on the line. "Meet me at the diner, not Ruthie's, the one on Route 9. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Bring anything you've got." "I'll bring the truth," Ezra said. "I don't have anything else." The gray interview room at the Millbrook Falls County Annex smelled like old coffee and industrial floor cleaner, the particular institutional smell that exists to remind everyone inside it that they are not, for the moment, in control of their own lives. Ezra sat at the metal table the following afternoon, his hands folded, when the door opened, and a woman in a charcoal suit stepped in. her heels clicking with the precise rhythm of someone who had walked into rooms like this 100 times and always walked back out having gotten what she came for. "Mr. Callum," she said, setting a slim leather folder on the table before she even sat down. "My name is Vivian Kessler. I represent the Prescott family's legal interests. I'll be direct with you, because I think you're a direct sort of man. My clients understand you've served your country honorably. They have no interest in destroying the life of a veteran over what was, at its core, a misunderstanding fueled by alcohol and a chaotic public event." "There was no misunderstanding," Ezra said. "Your client's son assaulted a woman. My dog stopped it." Kessler's smile didn't waver. "Perception is a complicated thing, Mr. Callum, and unfortunately for you, perception is what juries and county boards actually decide cases on, not the version of events that lives in your head. Right now you're facing a formal disposition hearing that could see your animal euthanized within 48 hours. An obstruction charge that could be escalated at the county attorney's discretion, and, frankly, a great deal of very unflattering press about a decorated soldier who lost control of his aggressive dog at a family event. None of that is what happened." "It doesn't need to be what happened," Kessler said, opening the folder and turning a single page toward him. "It only needs to be what's believed. Here's what I'm authorized to offer. You sign this statement acknowledging that the incident stemmed from a training lapse on your part, that you accept responsibility for insufficiently controlling your animal in a public setting, and that you agree to a voluntary surrender of the dog to a private sanctuary rather than a euthanasia order. In exchange, all charges against you are dropped. This entire matter disappears from the public record within the week, and my clients agree not to pursue any civil claim against you for Tyler's medical expenses." Ezra didn't touch the page. "You want me to say Koda attacked an innocent man for no reason?" "I want you to save his life," Kessler said, her voice softening into something that might have sounded, to someone less trained than Ezra, like genuine sympathy. "Because if you don't sign this, Mr. Callum, that dog dies on schedule in less than 48 hours, and there will be nothing you or anyone else can do to stop it. My clients control the county board that oversees animal control appeals. They control the sheriff's department that will enforce the order. They control, frankly, most of what happens in this town. You are one man with a citation and a folded piece of paper in your pocket. Don't let your pride cost that dog his life." Ezra sat with that for a long moment, and Kessler watched him with the patient, predatory stillness of a woman who had delivered this exact ultimatum to enough desperate people to know exactly how it usually landed. "You think I haven't been in worse rooms than this," Ezra said finally, his voice very quiet, very even. "You think a piece of paper and a threat is the worst leverage anyone's ever tried to use on me." "I think you're a man who loves his dog," Kessler said. "And I think that's the only leverage I need." "That dog," Ezra said, "has been shot at, blown off his feet by an IED, and left a piece of his hearing in a valley, in a country I'm not allowed to name. He has never once, in 9 years, done anything except exactly what he was trained to do, which was protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I am not going to sit in this room and sign a piece of paper telling the world he's a mistake. I am not going to spend the rest of my life knowing I bought his safety with a lie." Kessler's smile finally slipped, just slightly, replaced by something colder. "Then I hope, for his sake, that your pride is worth what it's about to cost him. The hearing is in 2 days. My clients will not be merciful about the outcome." She closed the folder, stood, and walked out without another word. Her heels once again finding that same precise, unhurried rhythm. A woman utterly certain she had already won. She had no idea that the moment she left the room, Ezra picked up the payphone in the annex hallway and made the only call he had left to make. Commander Elena Frost had flown in on a red-eye and rented a plain gray sedan rather than announce her arrival with anything that looked official, and she was waiting in a booth at the Route 9 diner the next morning when Ezra walked in, looking exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent 20 years learning to read a room before she said a single word. "Chief," she said, standing to shake his hand, her grip firm and brief. "Tell me everything, from the start, and don't skip anything because you think it makes you look bad." He told her everything. The shove, the bite, the catch-pole, the cuffs, Kessler's offer. Frost listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening at exactly one point, when Ezra described the wire loop cinching around Koda's throat. "That dog has a Silver Star equivalent citation and a documented combat record," Frost said when he finished. "The Navy does not take it lightly when a decorated working animal is threatened with destruction over a local political dispute, and we are not going to let a county board with a grudge erase that record to protect somebody's real estate deal." She slid a card across the table. It bore no insignia, just a name and a phone number. "This is Agent Dana Whitfield, NCIS. She's already looped in. She's going to want the raw festival footage before anyone else touches it, particularly whatever the county's already claiming is inconclusive." Priya Anand slid into the booth a moment later, laptop already open, dark circles under her eyes from a night spent tracking down every phone that had been recording in that parking lot. "I've got 6 separate angles," she said without preamble. 3 from bystanders, 1 from the diner's own security camera that nobody bothered to request because apparently the sheriff's department decided the footage was inconclusive without ever actually watching it, and 1 from a kid who was live streaming the whole festival on a fishing channel for his 42 subscribers. Every single one of them shows Tyler Prescott grabbing Sophia Marchetti and shoving her before that dog moved an inch. "Did you run any of this by your editor?" Ezra asked. Priya's jaw set. "My editor spiked the follow-up story this morning, said the Prescotts are the paper's biggest advertiser and we needed to consider the relationship." She turned the laptop screen toward the table. "So I'm not running it in the Gazette, I'm running it everywhere else. I've already sent the compiled footage to 2 regional news stations and a national veterans advocacy nonprofit that specializes in exactly this kind of story. It goes live in 6 hours, whether the county likes it or not." Frost nodded slowly, something like grim satisfaction crossing her weathered face. "Good, because I've spent the morning on the phone with Judge Advocate General's office, and we're prepared to file for an emergency federal review of the euthanasia order on the grounds that Koda remains, in a limited legal sense, connected to his prior service record and cannot simply be destroyed by a county ordinance without due process that actually accounts for that record. It's a narrow argument. It buys us time. It does not by itself win the war." "Then what does?" Ezra asked. "The truth, Chief," Frost said, loud enough that even a councilman's money can't drown it out. The disposition hearing was held in the small county board chamber above the sheriff's office, a room with mismatched folding chairs and a single window that looked out over the parking lot where, 4 days earlier, everything had gone wrong in under 30 seconds. Word had spread through Millbrook Falls faster than Grant Prescott had anticipated, and by the time the hearing opened, the chamber was packed past capacity, spilling into the hallway, a mixture of festival goers who'd witnessed the incident, veterans from the VFW post who'd heard a decorated military dog was being sentenced to death by a county board, and a scattering of reporters from stations well outside Prescott's usual reach. Warden Cole Bishop sat at a small table near the front, flanked by County Attorney Marion Reyes, a thin, nervous man who clearly understood which family had put him in his position, and clearly understood, watching the crowd, that this hearing was not going to unfold the way Grant Prescott had promised him it would. Board Chair Renata Voss, a retired county judge brought back to preside over exactly this kind of ordinance dispute, called the hearing to order with a gavel tap and a flat, unimpressed expression that suggested she, too, had noticed the size of the crowd and drawn her own conclusions about why a routine dangerous animal case had suddenly become the biggest event in Millbrook Falls that month. Reyes opened with the county's case, reading Tyler Prescott's statement into the record, describing an unprovoked, savage attack by an aggressive animal against an innocent bystander. He called Tyler to the stand, forearm still theatrically wrapped in fresh gauze, and Tyler delivered his account with the practiced, wounded sincerity of a man who had rehearsed his lines in front of a mirror. "I was just standing there, talking to a friend," Tyler said, "and this dog came out of nowhere and attacked me. I didn't even see it coming. I could have lost my arm." Marcus Chun, the overworked public defender assigned to represent Ezra's interests before the board, rose for cross-examination, and it was clear from his first question that he had not expected much room to work with. "Prescott, were you speaking to Miss Sophia Marchetti in the moments before the dog approached you?" "I mean, briefly, sure." "Did you make physical contact with her?" "I don't recall exactly." Would it surprise you to learn there are 6 separate video recordings of that exchange? Reyes was on his feet immediately. Objection. The board has already reviewed the available footage and found it inconclusive. The board reviewed one angle, Chun said, provided directly by the sheriff's department, which happened to be the only angle where the camera pans away at the critical moment. I'd like to enter into evidence 5 additional recordings obtained independently by a member of the press, none of which have that convenient limitation. Voss's expression sharpened. Counsel, is this footage available to view right now? It is, Your Honor. And I believe several members of the gallery have already seen it circulating online this morning, given the number of phones I can see currently pointed at this bench. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the crowd, quickly silenced by Voss's gavel, but the moment had already landed. She gestured toward the small projector screen set up at the side of the room, largely unused until now. Play it. What followed was 4 minutes of silence in a crowded room, broken only by gasps at precisely the moments that mattered. Tyler's hand closing around Sophia's wrist. The shove. Her body hitting the tent frame. The dog crossing the distance in under 2 seconds, biting only the raised arm, releasing the instant Ezra said a single word. Then the second video, the diner's own security footage, showing the same sequence from a wider angle, unmistakably clear, unmistakably damning. Tyler Prescott sat frozen at the witness table, his bandaged arm suddenly looking less like a war wound and considerably more like exactly what it was. Grant Prescott, seated in the front row of the gallery, had gone very pale, his jaw working silently, his eyes darting toward Sheriff Huxley as though searching for some intervention that was not going to come. Sophia Marchetti was called next, and she told her account with the same flat, unshaken clarity she'd shown in that parking lot, describing the grab, the shove, the pain in her hip, the moment she genuinely believed she was about to be struck. That dog didn't attack anyone for no reason, she said, looking directly at Bishop rather than the board. He stopped a man from hitting me, and then everybody in this town decided that was the crime that needed punishing. It was Warden Bishop's own turn on the stand, under questioning from Chun, that finally broke the county's case entirely. Mr. Bishop, did you review any of this footage before initiating the euthanasia process? I responded to the call I was given, Bishop said, his voice noticeably less confident than it had been 4 nights earlier in that parking lot. I acted according to the ordinance. Did anyone instruct you on how quickly to expedite this particular hearing? Reyes objected again and was overruled again, Voss's patience for this particular county's usual arrangements apparently having reached its limit somewhere around the 3rd video clip. Answer the question, Mr. Bishop, Voss said. Bishop's eyes flicked, just once, toward Grant Prescott in the gallery, and that single glance told the room everything the words that followed tried and failed to hide. Councilman Prescott asked that the matter be handled promptly. The chamber went very quiet. It was into that silence that the side door of the chamber opened, and Commander Elena Frost walked in, flanked by Agent Dana Whitfield of NCIS, and 2 officers in dress uniform who had driven 3 hours to be present for exactly this moment. They did not rush. They walked with the same unhurried, absolute authority Ezra himself carried, and the room seemed to physically shrink around them. Your Honor, Frost said, addressing Voss directly. I apologize for the interruption, but given what appears to be unfolding here, I believe the board needs to understand exactly what animal is currently scheduled for destruction under this ordinance. She placed a thick folder on the clerk's desk. This is the full service record of military working dog Koda. Tattoo number and unit history included. 2 confirmed detections of improvised explosive devices that prevented mass casualties among American service members. 1 documented engagement in which he sustained shrapnel injuries while shielding his handler and 2 other soldiers from blast fragmentation. A commendation signed by a 2-star admiral recognizing his service as, and I am quoting directly, instrumental in preserving the lives of the men and women he served alongside. This is not a stray. This is not an aggressive animal with no history. This is a veteran of the United States military, and the county is currently 3 hours away from executing him over a domestic incident in which every available piece of evidence shows he did exactly what he was trained and decorated for doing. Voss studied the folder for a long moment, then looked up. First at Bishop, then at Grant Prescott, whose face had gone from pale to something closer to gray. "Councilman Prescott," Voss said, "would you care to explain to this board why you personally contacted the Animal Control Department to expedite a euthanasia hearing before a single piece of exculpatory evidence had been reviewed?" Prescott stood slowly, adjusting his jacket in a small, useless gesture, his silver-templed composure finally visibly cracking. "I was protecting my son." "Your son assaulted a young woman in front of 40 witnesses, Voss said, "and you used your office to attempt to have the animal who stopped that assault killed within 72 hours, while simultaneously pressuring the man who loves that animal into signing a false confession." "Do you understand how that sounds, Councilman?" said out loud, "in a room full of the people you were elected to serve?" Prescott had no answer. There was no answer that would have made it sound like anything other than exactly what it was. Voss's gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the packed chamber. "This board finds no basis whatsoever for the continued detention of the animal in question. The euthanasia order is vacated, effective immediately. Warden Bishop, Koda is to be released into the custody of Chief Petty Officer Callum within the hour. I am also referring the conduct of this hearing, the original response, and the apparent political interference in county animal control operations to the State Attorney General's office for full review, and I strongly suspect Mr. Tyler Prescott will be hearing separately from the District Attorney regarding tonight's assault charge that should have been filed 4 days ago." She looked out over the gallery, at Sophia, at Ezra, at the folder still open on the clerk's desk. "This hearing is adjourned." The applause that broke out was not the polite, restrained kind. It was loud, disbelieving, cathartic, the sound of an entire room that had spent 4 days watching a small town's oldest and ugliest habit, protecting power at any cost, finally run headfirst into a wall of truth it could not buy its way around. Koda was released from the shelter 40 minutes later. Marisol Ortiz walked him out herself, refusing to let anyone else handle the leash, her eyes wet as she led him across the parking lot toward the crowd gathered outside. The moment Koda saw Ezra, 9 years of iron discipline dissolved into something purely, wonderfully animal. He crossed the last 20 feet at a dead run, and Ezra dropped to his knees on the asphalt to meet him, burying his face against the dog's neck while Koda's tail beat against the ground hard enough to raise dust. Both of them, soldier and dog, whole again after 4 of the longest days either had ever survived without a single bullet fired. Sophia stood a few feet away, watching, tears on her face that had nothing to do with sadness. Priya Anand stood behind her, laptop already open again, already writing the story that would run not in the Gazette, but in 3 regional papers and 1 national outlet by the following morning. The story her own editor had been too afraid to let her print. The weeks that followed reshaped Millbrook Falls in ways nobody standing in that hearing room could have fully predicted. The State Attorney General's investigation into Grant Prescott's real estate dealings uncovered exactly the kind of quiet zoning manipulation he'd been hoping nobody would ever look closely enough to find, and he resigned from the county council within the month, facing a slate of charges that had nothing to do with dogs and everything to do with years of using his office to move money in directions the public had never been told about. Tyler Prescott was charged with assault, pled guilty in exchange for a suspended sentence, mandatory community service, and a court-ordered alcohol program, a consequence considerably softer than what he'd tried to have inflicted on an innocent dog, but a consequence nonetheless, the first one of his adult life that his father's name couldn't erase. Sheriff Huxley did not run for re-election. Cole Bishop kept his job, after a fashion, though the county board required him to complete a full retraining course on humane animal handling before he was allowed back on the truck. And Marisol Ortiz, promoted to shelter supervisor in the shakeup that followed, made sure that course actually meant something this time. Sophia Marchetti was, at Priya's gentle insistence, the one who suggested the diner rename its back parking lot area, the one behind Ruthie's where it had all started, into a small memorial garden with a bronze plaque honoring military working dogs, Koda's name engraved at the top of a list that would grow over the years as other veterans in the region came forward with their own stories. On a warm evening 3 weeks later, Ezra sat on the porch of his aunt's house with Koda's head resting heavy and warm across his boots, watching the sun go down over the same ridgeline that had framed the festival lights not so long before. Sophia had stopped by that afternoon with a plate of sandwiches from the diner. On the house, she'd insisted, for the rest of his life if he ever came back through town. Walt Higgins, an old Vietnam veteran who'd stood up in that hearing room to speak on Koda's behalf before the board even called for witnesses, had left a bag of dog treats on the porch railing without saying a word, the particular quiet gesture of one old soldier honoring another. Ezra scratched behind Koda's notched ear, and the dog leaned into his hand the way he always had, trusting completely, the way he'd trusted him in the dark, on the other side of the world, and the way he'd trusted him in a parking lot, behind a diner, in a town that had, for 4 days, forgotten what it meant to protect the people who had nothing but the truth on their side. "We're okay, buddy," Ezra said quietly. "We're okay." The story of Ezra and Koda is a reminder that the loudest voice in the room is not always the one telling the truth, and that money and power can buy silence for a while, but they cannot buy it forever. Real courage rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly, stands its ground, and waits for the truth to catch up. A decorated working dog, who had already given more to this country than most people ever will, nearly lost his life to a system built to protect the comfortable at the expense of the honest, and it was only the stubborn refusal of one soldier, one waitress, one reporter, and one shelter tech to look away that turned the tide back toward justice. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that loyalty and courage still mean something in a world that too often rewards the loudest bully in the room, do us a favor and share it with someone who needs the reminder today. Drop a comment below and let us know which part hit you hardest. And if you believe that the bond between a soldier and the animal who serves beside him deserves to be honored and protected, type Amen in the comments below. We pray for every service member and every working animal who stands quietly between danger and the people they've sworn to protect, seen and unseen, thanked and unthanked. May you find peace, may you find justice when it's needed, and may you always have someone in your corner willing to fight for the truth. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about courage, loyalty, and the animals who never stop protecting the people they love. And before you go, one more time, tell us in the comments, which city or country are you watching from tonight?